Hello and welcome to the Endless Possibilities podcast. My name is Gareth and I'm joined today by the one and only Eva, as always. Hello, Eva.
Hi, Gareth.
Hello, and we are joined again today by last week's guest, David Buckland. We decided we had so much fun last week, we would invite him back on for more of a sort of friendly chat, a kind of a back and forward chat. So, hi, David.
Hi, David.
Hey, Gareth, Eva.
Great to have you back.
Yeah.
And actually, we have a name for this. So you introduced the Endless Possibilities podcast, but we have a name for this. Do you want to share the new name for
I'll
our
let you do
new
it because I
project?
forgot it already even.
Okay. Okay. So it's gonna be more a conversation style
Yeah.
recording, and it's called Endless Possibilities Unplugged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I tell you why, because we noticed last week, even though we had an absolutely amazing time doing the podcast, we noticed afterwards when the record button was off, we just kind of had a great time having a chat. So we said we'd bring David back and we'd have more of a back and forwards chat. And just on that note, David, with the memory, what do you think happens when you start to wake up and your memory doesn't seem to be able to retain information like it used to be? Do you have
Yeah,
any explanation for that?
yeah, that's very common. Yeah, basically, the brain prioritizes memory based on its emotional impact. So something that's emotionally important to us, we're much more likely to remember than what we had for breakfast 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And so when we shift out of ego identification, there's no longer an emotional impact for a lot of stuff we experience. So it just flows on by.
Yeah.
So we don't hold it. We don't
Yeah.
hold on to it.
So what I found is you actually have to create a new style of remembering. I call it bookmarking, where you just kind of make a conscious point to remember something. But I've also found that just what actually needs to be remembered, it's not remembered the same way, but it's kind of in the collective. And so if it's actually needed, it'll show up.
Yeah. It just
Yeah.
pops up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a
I
bit more
yeah.
trust.
Mm. Yeah, I notice when something comes up and then I talk to somebody about it, then it stays, for example. So always when there's an addition of just something coming up, like a thought or something is arising, and then if it's talked about with somebody else, it stays. Otherwise, it just leaves the system. It just leaves. And for example, when I do my healing sessions, after a session, I forgot everything. Like hardly remember what happened in the
Yeah.
session. It just leaves. Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
it's like our last conversation. Gareth brought up one of my posts that was quite recent, but was forgotten all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that goes. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I agree though that but something that reinforces it in some way, makes more of an impression in some way. But it's just kind
Yeah.
of this thing. Lauren Hoff talks about silence and flow, and it's kind of a good way to think about it, where there's those aspects that are silent, like inner consciousness, and then there's kind of flow, what's happening, because there's those in the dynamics of consciousness itself. Consciousness becomes self-aware, and then it starts to flow within itself and curves back. Actually, I'm saying that backwards here. Consciousness becomes enlivened, or we could say alertness becomes enlivened by liveliness. It starts to flow within itself, curves back on itself, and becomes self-aware. So that flow is kind of this fundamental quality of awake consciousness. And we can start to see that more and more in life. As when we purify in the system, then it allows the flows to start happening in the physiology, and the body starts to move in a different kind of way. You can kind of see when flows are first start happening, they have a different quality than purification. Like if we have a big release, the body can kind of jerk or twitch, or you can feel sensations and stuff like that nearby. But with flow, it's more there's, you know, you can have your arm kind of go up like this, but it's
Oh.
graceful, and your
So
hand
so
picks
you're
up
you're
spontaneous mudras and so on like that.
you're talking about kriyas versus mudras, right? So a kriya is more of a the shoulder might just kind of kick out or jump
Mm.
out, and
Yeah,
then the mudras are when the hands. I've actually, yeah, I see quite a few people doing the mudras, and some
yeah,
of them
yeah,
you could never replicate again with your logical mind. It's just something that
yeah,
the energy moves you into. Yeah.
yeah. And the body just takes positions that, you know, you don't know how they even did it, and if they tried to do it, you know, just on their own, yeah, they wouldn't be able to. Yeah.
Mm.
So
How this was, yeah, you
go
want to go
ahead. Go
first?
ahead. No, go.
No, I
Well,
wanted, yeah.
well, go ahead, Eva.
Okay, I just wanted to say how this is shown or was shown to me. When the system is more open and life can flow through the system more. So life energies, experiences are flowing through the system. So they are in the system. Then we have the full-on experience with the thoughts, the emotions, the senses going on and everything. And then when the experience is over, it fully leaves the system. This is how like an optimum system is supposed to work. And then the next energy flow or the next experience is coming in, same again, and then it fully leaves the system. The only thing that stays is the memory of it. That's it. The rest just leaves. So
And
this
it
is
doesn't
how
have a
optimum
charge.
system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that memory doesn't have a charge.
Mm.
Yeah, fully leave the system. That's really important. It completes,
Yeah.
because a lot of what we would call karma, or a lot of what comes up in our experience, is essentially in purification, is essentially unfinished experiences, things that
Mm.
experiences we had in the past that we didn't complete, that didn't leave the system. Some residue remains, and so it seeks an opportunity to come up to complete.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd mentioned about it too is we can actually experience laws of nature, or even like beings that are part of our physiology waking up in this process, and so they kind of start where they've been kind of restricted before, and they start to kind of move and express more. It depends on how you relate to it or experience it. Some spiritual communities actually encourage people repressing movements. Um, so it's kind of depends on where you're at. They consider them a
They
problem.
discourage it, David. Is
Yeah,
that what you said?
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I would be more inclined to let whatever wants to come true, let it come true, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
What
So
the
so
idea
I
here is
noticed,
releasing resistance. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
so I noticed early on when Kundalini was stirring, I would get that kind of a Shakti, side to side. I would kind of sit on my chair, rocking back and forwards. And then that kind of like got smoother and smoother. And then there was a period where the mudras would come in, and it felt very, very different. It was almost like um it was almost like my body was somehow creating circuits, like electrical circuits for energy to connect. Uh, and what my intuition was telling me was that maybe it couldn't get to where it needs to get. And that by me moving and connecting like fingers and nerve, like it was now making a new pathway so the energies could get around them blockages.
Yeah, it's
I don't
interesting.
know if this.
You're doing that triggered one in me.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Uh, funny.
It's yeah, it was really, really funny. Um,
But it
what
feels nice.
else?
It feels nice when you do it. Like when you do it, it just feels right. It's
Right.
just,
Yes.
yeah, so
But it's
interesting.
spontaneous. It's not something
Yeah.
like, oh, now I do this position and now I do that.
No.
It's kind of, it just happens.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you couldn't do it if you wanted to with your rational mind, right? It's some of them. Um yeah. So you're talking about these laws of nature wanting to move through us. What about these ascended masters, David? Like these groups of beings that are helping humanity. We had a woman on a couple of episodes back, and she was channeling these ascended masters. And the ringleader always seems to be Jesus, right? It's like Jesus, and he's got a group of other ascended masters, maybe Meher Baba. Do you have any experience with them? Because I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Um,
do.
Yeah, but they don't so much wake up in the body. They wake up in your awareness, or I mean,
in your
you wake up.
awareness.
Yeah, and it kind of depends. Everybody has different roles and relationships with this kind of thing, and
Yeah,
because there's that quality of personalization, which basically mean we relate to them in the way we relate to them, and it can be different from the common way they're expressed. Like when I first started experiencing Christ, it was, I later realized it was similar to how he's described in Revelations, not how, like I have a picture of Jesus at home that I really like with one of the classic, paintings. It's probably not what he looked like because they were usually clean
yeah,
shaven in those days and so on, but probably olive skinned and blah, blah. But and I like the picture, but the way I actually experience, is quite distinct. And there's different variations, Um, Ganesh has shown up here, and he's the elephant-headed god, but for me, he has elephant feet too, you know, which is fun when he dances. But so there's lots of little variation. There's no kind of the appearance is quite pliable and flexible, kind of like dream state. But the appearance is not what they're about.
yeah,
They're a way we might relate to them. Like having a conversation with the weather can sometimes be useful, but it's not their reality, I guess is one way of putting it. Um, their reality is kind of their deeper nature, the fundamental principles that they embody or express.
Mm.
Um, and the appearance is just a way to relate to them.
Yeah. How
but
did they show up for you? How did they show up?
Well, for me, there was kind of an initial period where I started witnessing. I was on that 6-month retreat, started witnessing, came back home, got a job and stuff. And then I started to experience what I later realized was astral beings. But I started to experience these beings coming around and being available for answering questions and stuff. And however, what I soon realized was that they were basically just wanting my attention. They didn't really have any knowledge. And when I found myself asking them, how basically giving my authority to them, like asking them about this simple decisions about what food to buy or whatever like that, I realized that was kind of this is a bad idea. So I
yeah,
took my attention off that and stopped
Mhm.
stopped stopped giving them attention, and that ended. But then a short while later, Krishna showed up in my inner experience, and um, so I was kind of circumspect. What's this? Whatever. Um,
yeah,
but for me, what happened was a series of the fundamental principles showed up embodied in various forms. Krishna, then Christ. Um, it turned out later on I realized that Christ was riding a white horse, but later on I realized the white horse was also one, but I hadn't recognized it at first. Shiva and so forth. And essentially, what was happening for me at the time was I was unfolding the layers of creation, from where creation starts down through into the formation of our universe. And there's a few layers there, and what was happening was they would show up, point out something, which would allow my awareness to move through that into the next level.
Mhm.
And so I kind of went through this kind of guided process to see until I got to the top of creation, and that was kind of as far as I was going to be capable of going without before, prior to waking up. Um, but once they showed up, they've been around ever since. If I put my attention there, they're there. Um, it's interesting though. I was kind of brought up to be self-sufficient, so I don't spend much time talking to them or whatever like that. To me, I have a human life to live, and so most of my attention goes on that. But they're there, and they're a resource. And then just over time, other kinds of beings have shown up and different things. You know, like there's this group of ancient sages that live just outside our universe, and they're kind of had an administrative role with it. You know, different archangels have shown up, and became aware. I took a class one time, and this one-off thing that a healer gave, to become aware of my guardian and guides and stuff that are there, because they're kind of with you all the time. Whereas beings like Krishna or archangels and stuff they're omnipresent, and so they can be available at any time, but they're not right there all the time. They're not kind of watching over you at every moment.
Yeah.
But the speed of that is really amazing. Like I kind of became aware of my larger team when I did something stupid one time, not intentionally, but I was basically kind of just the attention was kind of drifting around on inner levels, and I found this kind of barren space, which was kind of different. And so I was like, oh, what's this? And there was a cave, and so oh, what's that? And so I go into the cave, and it's full of demons. And it's like the attention of the whole group suddenly was on me. What are you doing here? And my team was right there right away. And so, you know, I got full support. So it's, you know, I give that as an example. It's not, you know, a typical experience particularly, but it's just that support is there. And just over the ages, I've picked up different, like there's an ancient Muni, it's called, a type of sage that got, we I don't know how to describe this. We connected basically prior to my first human life, and he's kind of been watching over me ever since. And so he's kind of there as part of the team. And just so it's just kind of this assortment, you know. There's a couple of archangels that are around and occasionally show up to give me a bit of advice, or something. And
It's so interesting, David, that you still that you're experiencing them, because for me this stopped at a certain point. I don't experience anything else anymore except for what's in my system or what's outside of my system, like the whole the how do I say it best? Like, let's say the whole divine mother, or just this one force, this is the only thing that's there, and I don't
yes,
experience anything else anymore. And before, I had, for example, also like Jesus showing up, or Mother Mira, the divine mother, and so on, and they were archangels also, and they were there in a moment when I needed them, and when there was something I needed to learn or to be shown. So they
yeah,
were there just for these moments. And then I also didn't really reconnect because I didn't really find a point. But this then just stopped. And now, for example, if I have to help somebody in a session because they have like negative energies or low vibrational energies, like they call them demons sometimes, in their system, then it's like I don't need to call anybody in because it's there. It's
yeah.
all like the information is all there. I know what to do. It's all in
In you.
in you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm talking about historically. You know, these are things that
Yeah.
have come historically. Yeah, there's kind of two things in there. One of them is that there's a similar process, but where it all fell away, and then it started to come back again with pure divinity, but the relationship with it was different, because it was all recognized as expressions of the one divine mother. Um, but there's also, it's kind of this interesting dynamic where I'm meeting people who work with them, and so it's kind of bringing them back in certain ways. And it's quite interesting because like I've met a couple of healers who work with Archangel Michael quite a bit, and Archangel Michael and I have some history, and yeah, it's too much detail to go into to explain, but what was really interesting was realizing how different my relationship with him was than theirs. Like theirs in the healing process, they have Archangel Michael come in and invite the dark influences that are there to leave. Whereas, so I was kind of like, oh, maybe I should be doing it that way. And Archangel Michael's response was, no, 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 what are you doing? No, no, this is how you do it the way you've learned to do it. That's the way. For me, there's not about being polite. It's just you don't belong here.
Yeah.
Out you go. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very similar for me, David. Even before I woke up, I was meditating one day. I had no connection to Hindu philosophy, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at the most beautiful image of Shiva's face, like so detailed, 3D. Then Shiva disappeared, and I didn't know it was Shiva, right? Then all of a
Right.
sudden, I'm looking at the image of baby Krishna. Baby Krishna disappeared. I went off. I started Googling the Hindu gods. I was like, oh my God, I just seen this guy and I just seen this guy. And as I started to go through the awakening process, right, I started to wake up. And at different points along the awakening, various gods started to show up. Okay. I think the first one was like Krishna turned up, saw Krishna, beautiful face. Then all this gold glitter came down around me. I had Durga turn up another time. Um Kali. I got to feel what Kali is like. I witnessed her. Um Lalita, I was chanting that Mahashadasi mantra. And towards the end of it, I was getting up to some really, really high numbers. I was like doing 3,500 repetitions a day of that mantra. And all of a sudden she turned up. And what they felt like to me was more like a signpost that as I was progressing through certain um realizations, they were kind of like, this is a signpost to say that you're making progress, and then they just disappear. And then you just spoke about them. You went into the cave, and the demons got up to, and they came in to protect you. I had something very similar when I was meditating one day. Um, Someone in the human form started projecting something very negative towards me, and I became aware of them. I could see their face and I could see what they were doing. And all of a sudden, Durga's line jumped over my shoulder and literally like just tore them to shreds. I was like, wow. But then, very similar to what Eva spoke about, I got to a certain stage, Brahman, pure divinity, it was still happening. And then things started to quieten down. They all disappeared, all the visions disappeared, the astral realms disappeared. Now it's just me experiencing myself as just pure consciousness. I don't sense anything good or bad or evil or gods, or it's just me. I'm just experiencing me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah. So I do not see anyone. If I put my intention out to have a conversation with somebody, nothing comes back anymore. Nothing.
Yeah, I guess it's dharmic, or partly and partly, where I'm at in some other way. I don't know. I've had this sense for quite a long time because one of the things that happened to me, for me was, after I came back, there was all this experiential stuff that had started on the 6 month retreat that just kind of continued, and it kept on opening up more and more, and but it wasn't. There was absolutely no practical value to any of it, and yet some of it was quite intense, and so it would basically mean, like, for a couple of days I'm kind of trying to process it all or whatever, and so how do I live my life like this? And so there was this kind of intense question about, what is this? And what kind of unfolded over time, what was that there's this sense of being trained uh, for a role that's after this lifetime. And so there's a lot to learn. And so there's kind of just this kind of process that started as soon as I was ready or whatever. And it kind of comes in waves. There's periods of time in my life, where I was just very focused on, with young children, for example, just getting enough sleep is a challenge.
Yeah.
And we're just being very mundane life for periods of time. And then there's periods where it's very more active and so on like that. It's yeah.
Yeah, when it was very present for me and when I had this shift into unity, I was very, very sensitive, and I felt energies, so
Me
beings
too.
basically. And when like I was asleep at night and they were entering the room, so I could feel them. I could just feel them
Same
during
for
the
me.
day as well. And that was, yeah, I had a lot of fear in my system at that time, so it was
Mm.
very fearful. And yeah, and then I was lucky to talk to a healer, and she said to me, I can choose what I experience, and I can also close this door again. And that's what I did back
Yeah.
then. As I closed the door at that time, because it wasn't helpful. It was just scaring me, and I didn't really get any messages or anything. I just felt them all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, when you have a lot of fear in the system, you, those ones are also more attract, right? The ones
Yeah.
who prefer fear.
Yeah.
So yeah,
They feed on energy. And so, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I
They get a
actually had that kind of
response.
thing when I was a
Mm,
kid, where I started experiencing dubious beings, and I was, yeah, it scared me. And I don't remember, somebody or other told me that it was just my imagination, and and that I could control it and stuff. And so, but which it was, I realized later it wasn't, but that approach was the right thing to hear, because then I basically chose not to experience it anymore, and it stopped.
Mm.
Uh, it closed the door, sort of, as you mentioned.
mm.
So yeah, but then later on, when things open up when I was older, then I kind of remembered, and yeah, but it really varies.
Yeah. It was like
Some
me as
some
a
people experience.
4-year-old. I was convinced I was a vampire because I was able to float out of my body at nighttime and move down the landings as a 4-year-old. And the only explanation I had
Really,
was that I must have been bit by a vampire because people couldn't do this. So yeah.
that's so cool. I didn't know.
Yeah. You obviously didn't read my book, Eva.
I did. I forgot. I forgot. Although I like the whole vampire stories. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um okay. I have a question, David. Okay. So we talk about awakening, right? And we talk about, let me see, I think I just put so the human get this is because I'm talking to a lot of people all the time, right? And they have an idea or a conception around like what they get when they wake up, right? And a lot of people think that somehow their life improves, right? Or they're now no longer, susceptible to pain and suffering, and they think that all just disappears instantly, right? So I'm
Yeah,
constantly
no
having
more
these
emotions.
conversations.
I was
Yeah,
hoping
yeah.
for all of that too. I was hoping for all of that too.
Yeah, so it doesn't. So the self wakes up to itself through the apparent form, right?
Yeah,
So it's not the individual having it, right? So the self
no,
starts to wake up to the reality of itself. Okay.
yeah. I had this
Now,
idea for a long time. I was going to become enlightened, but it's not the I that becomes
yes,
enlightened. We wake up from the I.
we wake up from the I. Now, here's the question, right? So the self wakes up to itself through the apparent form, right? In self-realization. But there's something we briefly brushed on last week was God realization, not God consciousness, God realization,
Right.
when God wakes up and experiences himself or herself through the apparent form, right? Mainly momentarily. I like because this was how I woke up, right? I had an awakening where God woke up through my form, looked out through my eyes, all his supreme knowledge came flooding in on, I realized that I had been dreaming, right? There was a part of me that wasn't here located in my reality, And I had fallen asleep and I had entered Gareth's apparent form, right? And my story, and I was believing this dream. And then I started to look around and I was everything. I was everybody. And I realized that I was dreaming myself into every being on the planet, right? Was me. And all of this information came in, but my nervous system wasn't able to maintain that. So it stayed
Right.
open for about 15 minutes. It closed down, and then I was left in a permanent state of self-realization. So
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen
what
similar things happen with a few people where there's kind of like a big unity process when they're with their awakening, and then it falls back to self-realization. Yeah.
it fell back to self-realization, and then I
Yeah.
had to move through all the different stages. Look, it took me a couple of years. So I kind of stayed in self-realization and God consciousness for about 2 years. Just I kept it quiet. I had only one friend, and I was kind of there for about 2 years, just living life normally, just kind of refining the perceptions, right? But what is the difference? Can we talk a little bit about the difference between self-realization and God realization? And
Okay, sure. Yeah.
what
Well,
yeah,
self-realization is the self, as you said, the self waking up to itself through this
yeah,
form. And essentially, there's this dynamic of consciousness curving back on itself, becoming self-aware, and you've got the observer or the subject side and the object or the forms and what we experience in the world. And with self-realization, it's the observer, the self, the witness side that wakes up to itself. I mean, you can
yeah.
have an awakening where the self wakes up as a witness or observer, but hasn't yet recognized itself yet. It's the
So
self.
it's just looking in. It's just
It's
looking
looking
in
in, yeah,
on
watching, and the ego is still identified. So there's still identified ego, and there's a self observing it. And some people confuse that with awakening, and it's kind of an awakening in a certain way. But essentially, you're witnessing. This is what I did for quite a long time before I finally woke up. And um, so there's that observer side awake. And then unity consciousness is when we gradually start to become aware that consciousness is underlying the world as well. And I mean, there might not be a real conscious process of that, but sometimes there is. And then at a certain point, there's a recognition that the self that's underlying the world and the self that's the observer are the same self, and they come together into one wholeness.
a
Um,
collapse. Yeah.
they collapse together. So there's no longer a subject-object duality anymore, and you inside and outside are no longer separate. It's all kind of just one
Is, would
wholeness.
you refer to that as non-duality, like real non-duality?
I would just say that's the beginning of non-duality.
Okay.
But unity itself is a progression. It's not a single shift because
Yeah.
there's all the layers of experience. So we've got the observer has woken up, then we wake up to the object, but the field of experience is many layered. There's the what we have our attention on. There's all the stuff around that. There's the kind of stuff around that periphery of vision. Memory, the future and past, and all this other stuff. And so, generally speaking, unity is a progression of experience of become. Um, now,
And David,
yeah,
it's been realized through the intellect, kind of. Would
but
I be
yeah,
right in saying
in unity, in self-realization, it's the self recognizing itself.
it's
But
the
in unity,
self?
it's the what happens after we wake up in self-realization is that the intellect has been associated with the mind, and it kind of
Yeah.
gets pulled around by the mind and that kind of stuff. But with self-realization, the intellect gets associated with consciousness, and it becomes what the texts call resolute. It becomes really stable and much more reliable. And some people might experience this as much more deeper and more reliable intuition, for example. Then in the unity shift, the intellect becomes key because it's a process of recognitions. That is the
It's
self.
knowing itself as everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see the
Yeah.
strawberry in the sink. Oh, that's myself too. And the bird flying by. Oh, that's myself. And at a certain point in the unity process, you can actually become the bird that's going by and experience what the bird is experiencing in
I
consciousness.
got that once. I got that once where I looked out of my car and I saw like a hawk or something flying, and I was simultaneously in the car and the bird at the same time. But
Yeah.
that was all I got from that.
Yeah, happily the body knows how to drive the car, and
Yes, yes, yes.
that's
I had this experience once. I was choosing celery, and I was at the same
I
time
hope
the
you were the
celery.
celery.
I was the celery. Yes,
Oh,
honestly, I was.
what's really interesting too is you're touching the celery, but you're experiencing the celery being touched too. It's like
Mm.
there's this kind of yeah, dual isn't the right word for it, but the simultaneous kind of,
Simultaneous, yeah.
both at the same. But one thing I did notice though was that it's my consciousness or my quality of consciousness that's doing the experiencing, and not the, like, so if you're experiencing what it is to be a dog, you can kind of get a sense of the dog's experience, but it's through your consciousness, not through the dog's consciousness. So you're not
I think that's very important to understand that it's simultaneously, and not I am the dog. I mean, you can say it like that, but
Yeah.
it's simultaneously,
Yeah, you're experiencing yourself as the dog, but it's still you doing the experiencing. It's not the dog's doing the experience. You're not experiencing the dog's thoughts so much. You can kind of experience the tone of the dog thinking, and how they're feeling and that kind of stuff. I was really surprised to find trees had feelings, and I remember when I went to grad school in my 50s, and there was these trees out on the on the field out front of the where the cafeteria and stuff was, and that here's the same trees, and before that I'd experienced how a group of trees like that will have some kind of a deva that takes care of the trees and that kind of stuff. But then experiencing the trees individually, realizing like one of them was had a major branch broke and it was kind of depressed, and the other trees were kind of like trying to ignore it because they didn't want to be caught up in its feelings. And it's different, a different kind of consciousness, because trees are, their metabolism is much slower, and they don't have specific sense organs, so they don't focus in the way we do. They kind of just experience the world in more general, terms. But if you sit at the foot of a tree, after a few minutes, the tree will become aware that you're there, and stuff like that. Anyways,
But back to the God realization, David.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So this process of self-realization, unity into Brahman, is shifts in our relationship with consciousness. We're the subject, then we become the object and the subject together in wholeness, and then we transcend both of them into Brahman. Now it's kind of like the masculine or Shiva process as it's described. And then there's the feminine or the Shakti side, where all the layers between your surface experience and consciousness unfold in awareness. And so that's through the refinement of perception and the awakening heart. And so the God consciousness shift is essentially when the heart wakes up and there's enough refined perception. Now, when I say perception here, we each tend to have a dominant sense. So we tend to experience things in a certain way. We might experience the feel of things, or we might be very visual, or we might be more sounds and stuff, and voices. It kind of depends on our dominant sensory. It might, and as it matures too, that tends to become more multi-sensory, but we tend to have a dominant sense. And I'm visual, so I use visual words and that kind of stuff, but you
I
don't
feel.
necessarily, you don't necessarily see Krishna. You might feel Krishna instead, and just have
Yes.
it's just intuitive knowingness about it. So there's this unfolding of the heart, and then with refined perception, we start to see that the world is being created and recreated in every moment, and we start to see the laws of nature and stuff like that we were talking about earlier, the principles, the devas, however you want to describe it, the beings that are involved. I mentioned about the tree deva. Basically we're surrounded by all sorts of life on the different levels, and we basically start to see the hand of God, not God itself necessarily, but the hand of God, and so we can begin to develop a bit of a relationship with that. So what's called God consciousness, because it's sort of, we start to see the divine in the nature of the world, the way the world's being formed, and so on. And we also start to see the mechanics of stuff like the play of karma and the way the world becomes, and some of that kind of stuff. So we see the hand of the divine in various ways. And it's kind of God consciousness is kind of a process. It can start before we wake up, the qualities of it. And but the fullness of it is when we have the heart opening and so on like that, and that's often a phase where people are just like,
and you think we can have that? You think you can have that before waking up, like self-realization?
I don't think the full heart
No.
opening can happen. I mean, there could be a heart opening during the Kundalini rise, the Anahata chakra. But what I'm talking about is a post-awakening descent when
the
Shakti rises to join the Shiva and the crown, and then with awakening, and then they descend together. When they reach the heart, there's this higher octave version of the heart that opens up, called Hridaya, and it's universal love and compassion and so on like that. It's not personal, and it can be like a floodgates open, and you just your heart gets bigger than your chest, and you're just like, for me it was like, where do I direct this? Because there was just so much love pouring out, and it was just kind of messy to kind of dump it on people, unexpectedly, that it's like, because they didn't know what was going on. so there's usually some desire to have an object of devotion, and for some people that's the form of the teacher or guru. For some it's a form of
or something
that they relate to most. They call it the Ishta Devata, or also known as the personal God. It's basically the form we most relate to. It's not the idea that when we talk about gods and all this kind of stuff, this isn't a polytheistic thing. It's more that there's one God, but many, many forms of, just like there's many.
So this would be Hare Krishnas. This would be really like the Hare Krishnas, devotional, crying, chanting, dancing around. Yeah,
and the other one was known as the Upaguru, which is when one expresses their devotion to another human, like often one's mate or someone we have high regard for, or something like that. And for me, it was a friend of mine that I respected, and I've since had another friend have their opening with me. It's kind of interesting because it sort of invites a relationship, but that's not what it's about. It's on a whole different level. And then after the unity shift, usually there's kind of oftentimes there's a falling away of the GC stuff, God consciousness stuff, with the unity shift, because the focus is back on consciousness, but as that matures,
for me.
the GC stuff comes back again in the unity context. That's known as refined unity, or unity in God consciousness. And that continues, but now there's the container is everything, and so the refinement is more inclusive, and we tend to be able to go into the finer details. It's interesting that there's a whole layer of a whole series of bodies that we become aware of. Like, more superficially, there's kind of like the emotional body and the mental body and the bliss body and stuff, intellect, that people become aware of. But when you start to get deeper, you get into the body of the universe, and essentially you experience it, and then you become it in the unity process. Whatever arises in experience, then you become, and in consciousness. At a point.
So does it become you, or do you become it? Because all of my realizations has been something other than me waking up through me. So the self woke up through me. I had the God realization, where it wasn't me having an experience of God, it was God experiencing itself through my form. I had the Brahman. It wasn't me having an experience of Brahman, it was Brahman waking up to the reality of itself and simultaneously realizing itself through me. And then I also had an experience with the Divine Mother, where she came and she experienced herself through my physical form. Um, so I want to get
Yeah,
to that as
Same.
well. The
it's
Mm.
Divine
kind of
Mother,
both.
yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like it goes both ways. But
Yeah, you're
essentially,
kind of here.
yeah. And so it depends. Some people don't experience this stuff, but there's they talk about it in the Upanishads, in the Vedic literature. Um, but there's kind of like you essentially you experience the universe from the outside, and then you become it. You are the
Yeah.
universe, and then there's what I refer to as the Devata body. Um, I can't remember what the Sanskrit word is, but it's basically a body of all bodies. No, that's not right. It's a body that it's basically like an outline full of points of light, and each of those points of light is creating the bodies and the experiences in all of that type of body in all time simultaneously. It's kind of hard to grok with the mind, but you can be it. So it's and then the next one is called the cosmic body, and that's the body of all bodies simultaneously. And so that's kind of an overlay that can happen in the refine unity process, or maybe later or whatever. And then so essentially there's the experience and become process, and you experience and you recognize you are. And then with the refine unity, that same process, but with all these different values. And it kind of comes to a point where you've experienced all the content that way, and enough of it, and then you come to God. And so God realization is essentially recognizing you are, or inversely, God, it can happen either way, or God recognize, through you. So you essentially become God. Now, I have seen people have that experience and then basically, like you could say, take it personally. I'm God now.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's not how it works, right?
No, that's not
It's
what it's supposed to be. And you see
yeah,
teachers claiming to be forms of the divine and that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
I don't know, it's a bit misleading because it's not, because this form, a human form, can have this experience of God and can experience being God, but the totality of God is so much more than just, I mean, it's
Through the
everything.
limitations
I
of
mean,
this
it's so
body
much.
mind, right?
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
it it's
exactly.
like it tries to come down and have a brief and it to me, I don't think you can stay in that permanently. So a lot of them, I've had the realization, and it lasts for a certain amount of time, and then it recedes, and it's sort of like
Yeah,
you
that
it's
recognition has
happened,
happened.
and you always have that. Yeah,
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 it's become part of the wholeness and part of the completeness, and then it's done. And so for me, what happened at that point is once essentially the self knew itself, because within consciousness, the consciousness becomes aware of itself globally, but also at every point within itself, within that dynamic. I mean, we're talking about an
meaning
infinite scale
meaning
here.
each
Yeah,
individuals of consciousness.
each of those
Yeah.
points can express, it can express forward as an object too. But yeah, essentially some of the expressions come form as a jiva or a soul, which is then embodied in some kind of,
Just explain jiva versus soul, because I think in your book you
well,
mentioned awakening through a jiva awakening and a soul awakening. Just what's I just didn't understand that.
okay. Yeah, I don't remember what I said in the book,
I
but
hang on, I have it
it's
here
all right,
because
but it's this jiva and soul I use as somewhat equivalent. Jiva is essentially the point value of Atman, or
okay,
the cosmic self,
so
or
like a witnessing version of the soul, is it?
well, it's the point value through which we're experiencing. Like in the Yoga
Okay,
Sutra, they refer to awakening as kaivalya, which means uh, the point. Basically, it's because it's you don't generally speaking, when people wake up, they don't recognize it as the point waking up to the whole. They just recognize consciousness is waking up to itself or whatever, some version of that, or sometimes it's waking up to a no self, or there's some variations of that I talk about in the book. Um, but it's not until later on in unity you sort of see the global and the point values, and realize it's the point that woke up to the whole, and then the whole wakes up to itself. And then at a certain point, though, it's always been the self looking in on itself. All forms and experiences and everything that's happened before that is the self looking in on itself. But at a certain point, it knows itself enough, and it essentially turns and looks outside of itself, and that's the way it happened here. And then what it discovers is Brahman, and then there's the Brahman is really tricky territory to talk about because because you're going past consciousness, so there's nothing to experience it. There is that quality of alertness is there, and so it can be alert to itself, but there's no self value there. There's no content to experience. There's no mechanism of experience. And so talking about Brahman itself means the great. It's called the Great Awakening. You wake up from your enlightenment of unity, because it depends on how long you've been in it. But a lot of people are in unity.
You lose unity, right? You lose it. You lose all the Shakti.
Yeah, and that's not how it was framed in the teaching that I followed earlier.
So it means Brahman contains all the stages, right? Is that what you're talking about? Because that's what I didn't understand. Because I was like, no, it doesn't. So I wanted to ask you about this actually, because it's not what I experienced.
Okay.
Or how you mean it, or how you mean it.
There's a radical, Brahman is radically inclusive. Like what I found with like self-realization was whatever was there before is gone. And so, I was trying to remember what it was like to live in an ego.
Including the memories.
I was walking down the street and it's like, I cannot remember what it was like to have an ego. And then this guy walks by me the other way, who's kind of drunk and cursing. And it's like, oh yeah, there it is. And then, then unity, same thing. You can't remember what it's like to be not, to be in duality. It's because everything is just this oneness. But Brahman has this inclusive quality where it collapses all these paradoxes. It's neither existing nor not existing. Like the sense of existing is something created by consciousness. You become aware that I am, that's it's consciousness that creates the sense of existing or being. So Brahman is beyond that, and yet it's inclusive of both being and non-being. And it's beyond consciousness, but it's inclusive of both conscious and unconscious or non-conscious or whatever. It collapses all these paradoxes and apparent dualities and things you never would have thought of that were still, because you're experiencing this unity with everything. You don't really think of there being any dualities in there, and yet there's still some subtle dualities of both existing and conscious and blah, blah, like that. And it just kind of collapses everything. And one of the interesting things about Brahman too is they describe as you become a law of nature unto yourself, and it's just there's this, like the rules just stop applying on so many ways. I mean, you have a body, you still have to take care of it, and various things. But in terms of, in the consciousness sense, it's like there's the Vedas say that you clear the path. I can't remember how they word it, but with Brahman, you essentially support 8 generations back and 8 generations forward. I don't think it's quite that tidy, exact numbers and stuff, but yet there is that tendency to clear the ancestral line, basically. So it's like
an Indian.
Yeah, but
there was an Indian teacher that I kind of studied briefly, and he would talk about a post-Brahman that he was joking, right? But he would say that I could hit you over the head with a stick, and the rules don't apply to him anymore. He's free to do whatever he wants in the world.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting liberation. It's like another level of liberation. I noticed during the unity stage that there was a series of subtle shoulds and musts that were still in there, very kind of subtle versions of stories, but just kind of, I mean, I guess you could call them samskaras, the ruts of habit. But those kind of things gradually fade off, and then it's just like a lot of spiritual communities, you have these things about eating at certain times and being vegetarian and sort of sitting a certain way when you meditate or whatever. But all that kind of stuff is just like, it just
Falls
goes,
away.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah, but it's because it falls away for us, for you who is in Brahman, and then it doesn't apply anymore, right? Because it's only there if it's in your system, if it's believed and experienced. Yeah, because if
yeah. And there's
that's
kind
all.
of, yeah. And instead you're kind of like, you just act from what, it's like flow. You're kind of like, oh, this is what needs to happen now. And oh, I'm eating lunch at 3 in the afternoon. That's curious, but okay. And it just, you just kind of go with whatever. And it,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to add a little structure. You have to kind of organize your day a little bit, whatever, like that. It's just,
Yeah,
it's,
but so many rules don't make sense anymore, and laws and stuff like that. It's not that, you know, we go around breaking them, but it's just like it just doesn't make any sense.
Eva breaks all the rules and the laws.
Just a few, just a few.
yeah.
I'm kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Is your question answered, Gareth? Because I just wanted to. I'm not sure. Is it answered? No. Do you
I
wanna?
mean, there's more I want to go with it, right?
Okay. Then you go.
Okay, so Brahman, okay, and then from Brahman emerged God, right? We'll just say God or a
Divinity.
plane of existence, right? From Brahman. So consciousness eventually progressed from Brahman.
Yeah.
And to me, this was witnessed as, and again, this was something that I became. I shifted into it, and I became it while I was there. So it was a cyan sea of blue, pure potential, love, intelligence, and it was just shimmering bliss. I mean, I could have stayed there for eternity, right? I never wanted to come back. And my understanding was that this was the mind of God, right? The impersonal form of Krishna. So there was, it's almost like a triad, right? So there was nothingness, there was Brahman, then there was this somethingness, this plane of existence that was pure potential, and then there was the Divine Mother, and the Divine Mother is like the supercomputer who's creating all of the realities. So my understanding is, right, we are both a part of Brahman, right? Our soul is a droplet of Brahman, and we are a spark of that God plane, right? We're like a spark of it. So we contain both in our being. Okay. And then the Divine
Yeah, I
Mother
don't see
is
them
the
as
one.
separate things. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of
Yes.
see it as that drop of coming through Brahman into form.
Into form. Yeah.
Excuse me. So
Yeah.
it's like a drop of, yeah. Um, so they're not two different things, but it's
No,
like
they're
Brahman coming through.
contained.
Like one of the
Yeah.
things, okay, one of the things for me, what the way it unfolded here was there was Brahman, and when I first shifted into Brahman, it was more about the loss of unity, because you go from everything everywhere to nothing. And it can be a little scary. Some people come to the edge of that. It's like when people first wake up, the ego doesn't want to let go, and it's kind of like you're standing on the edge of a cliff. Um, but you have to let go and just allow. And it's a thing similar with Brahman. You can kind of come to the edge of it. It's like, ooh, it's a
Yeah.
big change. And but some people just kind of go with it or whatever. But it varies a little bit. But it's a big change because you're going from everything everywhere to nothing. And
And nothing.
and so at first, what you tend to experience is that loss of what was there before. Because Brahman is quite a bit more subtle in consciousness. And so you don't know what it is yet. And then as you settle into it, you kind of become aware of how it's kind of like this totality is one of the words they use. It's like all this collapse of paradoxes in it, and it's just uh yeah, but it's the words fail.
I can use two
But
words.
then
I can
yeah,
share two words. So
Go
first,
on, you.
it was the nothingness, because like so before there were always energies coming towards me, and they were kind of doing something to my system. So in unity, there is a reflection of the self in everything, and then in Brahman, there is no reflection of nothing anymore. So if something comes towards you, it passes your system, through your system, because there's nothing in you anymore. So everything was just experienced as nothing, nothingness, like that. going
Oh,
through the
interesting.
nothingness. Yeah.
I hadn't
And then
associated that with Brahman. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay.
and then when the nothingness left, it was just emptiness. And it's very different. The words maybe sound similar, but it's just the experience was very different.
Yeah.
But this was a big change, like the energy flow, because in unity
And
is
even
the yeah.
and even how myself and Eva would talk about it, we would describe it differently. I had the sense that I had fallen down a well, and I was looking up, and my world, all my, my family, loved ones were up there, and I was down in the darkness, and that went on for 2 years for me, Dave. Um, whereas how did you explain it, Eva?
I mean, for me, it was more like, when you're in a very deep meditation, you're basically sucked out of your body and you're up there somewhere. So I was up there all the time. And then when I had a conversation, I had to come down and
Yeah,
speak. And then
yeah,
when the other person was talking, I was up again. And then when it was my turn, I had to come down again. So it was kind of very exhausting to talk to people. And I kind of, didn't really like it because it was nice up there, kind of, it was nice. But yeah, it was
Yeah,
it was like
that's
in
an
a deep
integration
meditation.
thing though. There has to
Mm.
be kind of integration
Yeah,
where it comes together
yeah, yeah.
more. Yeah, I remember when
mm,
when I first woke up, um, I sat to meditate and I couldn't figure out how, because the person that meditated was gone,
Mm.
and
gone.
there was sort of this idea way off in the distance, something I became aware of eventually. And that after a couple of days, then I kind of figured it out, and it kind of integrated more. There wasn't that separation. But with the Brahman ship, what basically I sat with it, and just very gradually there was sort of more of a sense of Brahman, hard to put in words. And then I started to become aware of these qualities that were there, not manifest qualities, but just potentials, and alertness, liveliness, intelligence, and then I kind of realized that those were what combined to create consciousness, and
Mm.
that's what I would refer to as refined Brahman. It's kind of like the same process that had been going on before, but now in Brahman. But it's completely different because it's not consciousness that's refining. It's not refined perception of something. It's refined perception of nothing. it's
Yeah.
it sounds oxymoronic, but 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 yeah, it's this gradual becoming aware of these very fundamental, qualities is about the only word for it. And then there would be periods of where I had kind of these surges of white light, um, but they wouldn't stay. And then at a certain
It,
point, it just like I fell into the white light, and then it kind of poured into there was the shift, and then the white light just kind of poured into the physiology, and just filled it up.
that's
Um,
that's how I had it.
yeah, and then later on there's these experiences of divinity, but it's not they're not experiences in consciousness the same way. There isn't kind of form. It's just trying to how to describe it. It's like the idea of it, but not the expression of it. It's like the idea of a form and being held, but
Just the formless.
yeah,
It's just,
yeah. But the
just the energy, the
formless is
light.
full and alive, and um and profoundly loving and supportive, and creative, and there's the whole thing there. Um, and the way I experience it now is that um, the divine has this idea of creation, and it's expressed forward by consciousness, but consciousness is doing its best um, to mimic that divine idea, but it's imperfect. And so in the
Through the
experience of
form, David, through the physical
yeah,
form. Yeah.
it's
Okay.
imperfect version of the thought of the
Yeah.
divine thought. And so we end up having suffering and difficulty and those kind of things because it's imperfect. Now part of that is because of the age we've been in. We're in a rising age of consciousness, collective consciousness is rising as more and more people are waking up, and more people are doing meditative practices and so on. And so that's lifting all boats, and we're in a rising age. And you know, if you look at the cycles of time, the way they're described, and you know from what I've experienced of our history, the higher ages are a majority of the time. And so people do experience life, even if they're not awake, they experience life as if awake, and they have that kind of support and feeling of you know, being a belonging and having a role and that's clear, and you know that the skills have an avenue and all this kind of stuff. But there is that, you know, there is that sort of flawed part where we end up actually suffering. I mean, there's value in, you know, making a mistake and saying, oh, this isn't the right direction, and correcting our paths and stuff. But when that actually becomes suffering and we don't see where we made the mistake, and we don't know what to do, or what, you know, where to go or whatever like that, those kind of things are you know, to me, a side effect of consciousness attempting to mimic divinity, but not getting it quite right. Pretty close, but a little bit of a problem.
So in pure divinity, Dave,
Yes.
like there's my experience was a constant flowing,
Yes.
coming, and it felt like light, like a shimmering, liquid light coming in, filling up the cells over and over every day, coming, and it was almost like platinum white. Was that your experience? Yeah.
Yeah. There was a
Flowing.
space for me in the solar plexus where it couldn't go. There was still some resistance or something in there, and so it kind of went around it and underneath, and then kind of you know, absorbed it.
But this is a process, right? This isn't just a
Yeah.
one shit. This takes weeks and
Yeah.
months, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the interesting things for me too, that happened was essentially it was immersing the devas of the body in divinity. And so it was causing them to have spiritual awakenings. And it was a really interesting dynamic to watch, because it was sort of happening sort of locally, so to speak, in this, through this physiology. But when I say physiology, I'm not just talking about the physical body, but the whole system kind of thing. And then so they were shifting here, and then that was falling back into the collective, because they're collective beings. And that kicked up so much dust. And that was around the time that a whole lot of stuff started happening in the collective too. So so there's kind of like this amazing transition that's happening where not only are a bunch of humans waking up, but you know, just as humans can supply soma, we talked about that yet the last time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
last
we
time,
talked
yeah.
on the last one.
Yeah. So too, we can also help with the spiritual awakening of the devas, and so there's the laws of nature of the world become spiritually awake, and that's the whole different level of experience can be possible. But it's going to take some time. I mean, just because the key thing to talk when talking about these things, you know, we can have our self-realization shift and our unity shift, whatever like that, but that's not the full thing. That's just, we've had the shift, we've got the platform, and then it has to be integrated into our life, and everything kind of brought into that. And so, you know, with self-realization, as often we notice, you know, mental narratives come up, and you know, stories, I call it, and we realize that, oh, we can see them now. Before they were just kind of in the background, and we just like part of the monkey mind babble. But then we start seeing them much more consciously, because the mind is much more quiet. We're effectively meditating 24/7, because you know the consciousness is awake all the time now, and so, you know, these things kind of settle out, and then these things come up, they're triggered, and it's like something we picked up when we were 2 years old or something, and story about whatever, and we're going through our life, and this gets triggered, and it's like, oh, we don't believe that anymore, and kind of go through this whole process of clearing this stuff out. And I mentioned with post-unity, you get these shoulds and musts, and kind of a more subtle value of some of that, and just like these layers and layers of stuff that gets seen, and and just also our understanding. We can have these concepts about awakening that were true when the teacher said it, but how we interpreted it at the time got a little bit twisted. So we had to kind of,
Yeah.
pull that out and bring it back again in a new context. And that can happen with every stage change. Our sense of, and actually for me during the unity process, it was like almost every day there was the sense of reality was different, because what had been integrated, the wholeness was getting bigger and bigger and more inclusive. And so it kind of make these subtle shifts in reality each day, or every few days, or whatever it was that was happening.
David,
Yeah, I experienced it the same. I
yeah,
experienced it the same. Yeah.
I-
Every day felt totally different. There was no continuity. What's the word?
continuity.
Yes,
Continuity. Yeah. Yeah. Some words, some English words I can never say.
I admire you for being able to have this kind of conversation.
Oh yeah, yeah. In our second language, right? It's
Oh,
incredible.
Well, the thing is, the most books I've read are in English, because there is hardly anything in German, or there is nothing in German really. Eckhart Tolle is in German, but I mean, further stages like somebody who talks about unity or Brahman, I haven't come across yet. Yeah, so.
Well, it's
there's only
interesting too. What I'm gradually realizing is a lot of the old Vedic texts that I've studied on these things. I even got grad degree and stuff like that in this stuff. They kind of talk about the process of unity into Brahman, but then it kind of stops. There's very little that talks about more than that. I mean, classically the sage Shankara, he was one that he kind of revived the monastic tradition that pretty much died out in India. He revived the monastic tradition and brought out what we would call today, well, the Advaita, the non-duality. That there's kind of a version of that. It's not quite the way he talked about it, but it's interesting because he kind of went along this very intellectual path for a long time, and he went around India teaching, and he'd have these debates with teachers, and basically the idea is if they lose the debate, his students become his students. And he'd beat all these other teachers in debates, and he lived only 33 years too. That's the amazing part of it too. But at a certain point, there's this whole shift. There's this story that he's walking along this river, and his foot gets stuck in the mud, I guess, and he's trying to pull his foot out, but it's not coming, and so he sees this washerwoman crossing a bridge nearby, and asks for her help, and she replies, "Oh, it's just an illusion." And he realizes it's Divine Mother, and he has this whole. Then he writes this whole poem to Lalita, and he goes into a much more devotional phase. But a lot of people studying, Advaita don't recognize that later stage where he kind of goes beyond that. But there isn't a lot of stuff about. There's a lot less content about the God consciousness, refined unity, and pure divinity process, because it's not as present, especially in a heavier age. And as we're kind of moving forward, there's more of that showing up. Some people now are having.
Can I ask you something? David? Oh.
Well, I wanted to include Eva as well. So me and Eva both had a post Pure Divinity where the Divine Mother showed up for both of us.
Yeah.
And and I mean, like, nobody's talking about this. Is that what you wanted to say, Eva, or
no, something else? But that's fine. Yeah, that's also very interesting.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's part of
okay,
divinity, because she is pure divinity.
She is pure divinity. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll just briefly tell you, and then Eva can give her side, right? So I had an experience where I fasted. I actually done a breatharian initiation, and I didn't eat for 3 months. I was living just on a couple of 4 ounce or 8 ounce glasses of orange
Juice.
juice a day, and it went. And I didn't know why I was doing it, and then 3 months in, I had an experience at the end of a 5 day retreat I was doing where the Divine Mother came in and she experienced herself through my physical form. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I was feeling galaxies being birthed through every cell of my body, right? It's
Yeah.
like what you described earlier about this cosmic body where everything, and I mean, I was feeling galaxies coming into creation, being birthed through explosions of bliss, right? That I couldn't handle. And this went on for hours. And it was her. I could feel her. I became her. She became me. And I experienced her, what she is through my limited biological body, right? It was like my body became her cosmic body, right? And all the
Right.
galaxies and the realities and everything. And she told me that the 3 months of fasting had all been in preparation for this moment where she was going to merge with me. Now she left, but when she left something in my heart. It was like this something had changed in my heart. And on the same retreat, Eva had the same thing happen as
Yeah.
well. Do you want to explain
Yeah.
your
So it
experience?
was like 2 days before. And I had that experience too. We were listening to devotional Divine Mother music, and I experienced like this this infinite, strong, feminine, powerful energy, full of wisdom and all of that coming into my system and looking through out of my eyes. So that was the Divine Mother being in my system for about 20 minutes, and it was very strong. And yeah, it was such a beautiful experience. There was so much love flowing. And then I asked her, because I can experience this right now, how can I experience this all the time? Because apparently it's a thing, right? And then she told me I have to get rid of human love. And then I was shown over a period of 2 weeks, and I felt a lot of love in those 2 weeks, like a lot of love pouring in, like this unconditional divine love. It was very beautiful. What I see as human love. So, I only love you if you love me back, or I only love you if you're nice to me, or I love you because you are a family member, or something like that. So always like the conditioning, the human conditioning. And then eventually, when everything, so I gave everything to her. I gave all the conditioning, everything that was shown to me. I gave everything to her. And then when everything was gone, this is when I became the Brahman. So then everything was gone. Yeah. So that
Right.
was my
Yeah.
experience.
I was similar. I had my process with because my um ideal form, my personal God, the form of personal God was Divine Mother, in form at that point. And yeah, I had a process like that in the refined unity stage too, prior to Brahman, and then I became her, and yeah, and then the Brahman. So similar.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I also
Mm.
had somebody inform who I felt, let's say, a little bit devoted to. An incarnation of the Divine Mother and Avatar. And then later on, she fell away. And then kind of the
I
formless
thought you were going
Divine
to say
Mother.
me, Eva. I thought you were going to say me.
Oh, sorry. You were part of it, but you were the human.
I'm
Um,
kidding.
And then it was so interesting because then for a while, so in Brahman there was nothing, but then when the refinement came in, and like all these qualities came back, the love, the joy, and all of that, I got a sense of the Divine Mother back. So the Divine Mother was there. But then I had another experience, and I told you about it. So when my consciousness traveled um, in creation, outside of creation, up to the source of source. So I call it the origin light, or you said it's the
Yeah.
source of source.
Right.
And this light then entered my system. Then this fell away. So the experience that I experienced God or the Divine Mother both fell away. So I don't have any experience of that anymore. So that light, the
Yeah.
origin light, or the source of source light, came into my spine, back of the head, into my spine, entered, and then I got the answer that it was given back to me because it has been mine. Yeah, and then all the senses of that fell away. I have no sense of anything anymore. Yeah.
So
for
Eva,
me,
sorry,
go ahead.
was that when everything just collapsed then? There was like nothing, no
Yeah.
gods, goddesses.
No,
And,
no,
and
no,
that's my
no,
experience as
no,
well, David.
no, because goddesses and everything that all fell away in Brahman. But then later on, in the more refinement of the Brahman, so when all the qualities started to come back, the love, the joy, the bliss, the transmissions and all of that started to come in, I had a sense of the Divine Mother. So that I was using her transmission at first. So this was the sense. But then that I have an experience of her or of God fell away by that experience when I visited that
that's what I
origin
mean.
light.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was
Okay.
like you're no longer using them. It's like
Oh
you're
yeah,
just
yeah.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they can kind of show up as a vehicle or as part of a process, and
So
then
what
there's
happens then, David? What's going on in that?
well, like I said, they're showing up as a vehicle for the process, and then when the process is complete, they're not
They
needed
just
anymore.
disappear?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not. And prior to that, there's a tendency to stay. When you're still in the field of form, there's a tendency for the stuff to opens up and then it stays there because it's part of the range of experience. But then later on, it's just that stuff isn't really needed anymore, and then it's just divinity itself. Now, the thing about the refinement part though is that it's I talked about how, self-realization, God consciousness, unity, refined unity, and that. For some people, like I know a couple of people where the refinement, the God consciousness part is happening after the Brahman shift. And so they haven't had a God consciousness and stuff. It's changed. They're having their heart opening in Brahman. So that's a whole different scenario for that to unfold in. So there's going to be a lot less of the content and the details and stuff like that. But there's still some value of it unfolding. And so the stuff doesn't happen. The two masculine and feminine processes, it's nice when they're in sync, but sometimes they're out of sync, and they're, but that's
Yeah, I
fine.
mean they weren't experienced as male and feminine, masculine and feminine. It was just the Divine Mother and God. Like God is everything that is, and the Divine Mother is just the creation, the part that's creating. So that's what was the experience, and this also fell away. Yeah, but maybe it's just what you call that's just divinity. Then it's possible. Yeah. So when nothing is left, like nothing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So, and
So
that's how it
we
feels for me.
all the way, and then we get nothing.
Well, we get divinity. We're divinity.
Yeah, it's divinity, which
Yeah.
is more than nothing. It's like it's more than everything. It's like
Yes.
because it's like
Of course.
you mentioned
Yeah.
about the mind of God. Within the mind of God, there's kind of like these idea forms, unexpressed idea forms, and each of them is an entire creation. And it's like I went through this little process with it, just trying them out at one point, and put your attention on it and it expresses. And there was one I tried that was this really, really simple creation. It was just a single life form, and it was almost like this hunk of mica with and it would just kind of gradually flake little bits off and dissolve into nothing. And that was the creation. But it was this pure embodiment of time, and the sort of the process of experience as in a process of time. And it was for the being, it was profoundly blissful. It was like each time a little flaking out, it was like dissolving into bliss. And but I really understood time after having the experience of that creation. And and there's other ones I've looked at that are just incomprehensible. They just don't. There has nothing in common with any kind of laws of nature we've experienced before. So that there's yeah.
David, I have a question about the source of source. So is there something, can you share something about it? I mean, is there something behind, I mean, probably not, but is there something behind the source of source? Because it feels like, I mean, it's coming from somewhere. So is there something behind, or did it just seem like that?
Well, it's for me, it's like this, liquid light that's pure divinity, It's kind of like the way when we were first meditating and getting close to waking up, we can experience periods of pure consciousness by itself without any content. And this is pure divinity by itself without any Brahman, without any consciousness, without any creation. It's just divinity. And then everything basically is, because after the pure divinity shift, it's like you walk around, you're walking through divinity. It's not, there's nothing that's not divinity. And yeah, I lost track of what I was going to go with that, but because there's also the other thread we had about.
Yeah, I
but
just ask if is the source of source, if is there something behind it, or.
Well, the reason I call it source of source is because everything we experience comes out of consciousness, and divinity creates the qualities that become consciousness. So it's the source of that source. So I call it para-Brahman or pure divinity or source.
So
of
its
the
source is Brahman, right? Its source is Brahman.
No,
It
divinity creates Brahman. The way I would describe Brahman is it's like the afterglow of divinity. And the light of consciousness is actually divine light coming through from behind, so to speak.
I mean, just how I experienced it, it was like a well of light, because for me it was light. I didn't call it source, it was light because I'm working with light. So that's just how I saw it. And it came out of like a well, and then it multiplied itself right away into multiple lights. And these are the lights, for example, we are transmitting. So that's how I understood it. These are the lights.
That's the way it's expressing.
Yeah. This is like the highest truth, and then we can bring this down, and then it can transform people's systems towards their personal highest truth. So this was just my understanding from it, but I just felt like I could go into that well, and there is something behind. But I will, maybe one day I will go there, and then I will tell you what I saw.
Yes.
Yeah.
The well is like
you'll
a
see David there with a
passageway.
big smile on his face.
It's like a passageway into a much bigger space.
Yeah, probably because, a well, there is always there is something, like a well comes out of a mountain, and there is a lot of water flowing from all the areas under the mountain. So there must be something more, right? So this was just my understanding. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I don't get any sense of anything more than pure divinity.
I have one last question, if I can, right? And it's about the dark light. Have you come across the dark light? It's like a light without color, and it seems to be a plane of existence, and there's like times just doesn't exist there, and it seems to be like particles. It's like, and the way I experienced it was like I could be there, right? And it was like, oh wow, it's sort of, I mean, there's no color, right? But it's a light, and then there's like little specks floating around in it, and then while you're there, like nothing exists, right? You're completely like you're no longer in reality, right? But then I could come back into the body, and I go, oh wow, there's no time, there's no nothing, and then I could go back into it. But and I asked what it was, right? And I was shown the image of, do you know the Indian avatar Mother Mira? The So and so all of a sudden I asked what this light was, and I was shown her face. So, I mean, she's like, what she works with is called the Paramatman light. I don't know if you know, do you know that concept?
Yeah.
So, like, I was wondering what that dark light is, because I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's two places I've experienced something that I might call, or I don't use the term, but that I might refer to that way. One is what I would call the memory of the divine mind. Is like this, almost like a glossy black field with these kind of I don't even call it idea forms in it that's going to sit there that you can activate to become creations.
I don't think that was it.
And the other one
There's
is
nothing there, no.
like there was a kind of a shift where in creation, you experience sort of these layers of like this, what Dante called the primum mobile at the top, with kind of this celebratory beings in there, and then it kind of comes down into this a couple of layers, and then it kind of, you have kind of this sort of the Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, kind of these stages, and it comes down to where the universes are formed. And, I want to describe them like the universes like pearls on the necklace of Brahma.
Yeah.
But or you can look at also the field of consciousness being globally aware and aware at every point. But both of them are kind of on a field of, in my experience, are on a dark field. The light's on a dark field, right? And at a certain point, I suddenly realized that that dark field was Krishna.
I've heard that
And
as well. He's
yeah,
darkness, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
because Krishna means black.
Yeah.
And it's like it was all, even the sort of the background, the outer space in a space photo or whatever was the divine, was it was all conscious. It wasn't just like points that are, some of them are consciousness expressing as beings, and some of them were, it was the total consciousness, and it just beyond anything that this body mind could not handle, but could embody.
Yeah.
Just this totality of consciousness.
I mean, I've experienced the black light coming through. So I've experienced that in giving transmissions. And what you explained, Gareth, what a very distinct quality of that was. Usually when there is light, there is movement, but there was no movement at that plane, what you described before, right? Because I
It's pure
experienced it as well.
stillness.
It's stillness. And this was
No
the very
time.
profound part, because usually there is movement, or there's something going on, or there are beings, or there's something, but this was just stagnant, nothing.
But the reason why it was light is because it's not inert. It's conscious. It's aware. It's alert. Maybe just be alert.
It's alert. It's alert. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
alert.
It's alert. But there's no
Yeah,
color in the light.
right. There's no color, but there's an alertness to it, that it's a, yes, and that's, so it's a black. Yeah, I can see why you'd call it a black light. Yeah. I hadn't used the term, but yeah, I can see so
It
there's
was really
different,
nice.
right,
I mean,
experiences.
it was a really beautiful place to hang out and come back. I could come back into the world, and I could look around and go, wow, there's no time, is just a complete illusion. And then I could go back into the light. I was like, oh wow, this is really, really nice. And I just knew that nothing existed outside of that light. It was just and it wasn't Brahman, right? Because Brahman was something else. But it was just a timeless plane of existence, and it was a
Yeah.
colorless light, dark. Yeah.
Yeah, you brought something up there that I think is interesting to touch on. There's that distinction between illusion and appearance, because there is that process where the world can seem very solid and real. Shankara talked about this, actually. The dominant guna is the way he described it. So when the tamas, or inertia, is dominant in our physiology, we experience the world around us as solid and real. And with spiritual practice and stuff, we go through kind of a transformation, rajas, fire, of we kind of go through this transition from tamas into sattva, or purity or clarity. And when rajas becomes dominant in the transformational process, then the world can take on the appearance of being illusory, that is a mirage. But then as sattva becomes dominant, then the world is seen as lila, the divine play. So that's kind of getting into more of the God consciousness experiences and stuff. And I don't know, where was I going with this? Oh yeah. But then a little further on, you go beyond the gunas, and then the world, kind of from a Brahman perspective, then the world becomes like an appearance. And some people will still be in a rajas process in Brahman, and so they'll experience the world as illusion. There's kind of these different combinations of things that can happen. But what it evolves into post guna is as an appearance. So it's not real in and of itself, but reality is behind it. Like it's being created by reality, and it has a purpose and function, and it's not just a complete mirage with no point.
And
Yeah.
it's been projected onto a screen of Brahman.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, well, screen of consciousness is how we describe it. But yeah, this, yeah, same thing basically.
Behind the
Brahman,
screen, but if we peek behind the screen, it's Brahman, right?
yeah, yeah. There's kind
Yeah.
of there's a um, the way we've been talking about Brahman is mostly what's known as the nirguna or the no guna
The
Brahman,
Nirguna.
the silent.
Yeah.
But they also talk about in terms of saguna Brahman, which is with qualities. And so the world, the field of consciousness, and all the things we experience in the world, blah blah blah, is saguna Brahman. It's also Brahman. And yeah, it's kind of a different experience of the world when with the Brahman when you're experiencing, because it's like there's this experience that there's nothing here, and yet simultaneously you're seeing something and you're experiencing the world, and it's just like this almost like this shimmering um, appearance overlaid on nothing. It's quite intriguing.
Mm.
I remember.
I was shown from the Brahman perspective in a consciousness travel into Earth, and there were like other communities and beings and how do I say it? Like not people, but like communities, beings, and all of that, and they live there, and they don't even know that we exist, and they also have a sun, and they have a sky, and all of that, even though it's in Earth. And I was shown all of that from the Brahman perspective. So that was very interesting, very random. I wasn't looking
Oh,
for this.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't
And they are not
experienced that.
aware of us. They're not aware of us. We're not aware of them. But like basically full Earth, the whole Earth is kind of populated by, populations, but we don't know
Wow.
about each other. Yeah, that was
You know,
very
one of the
interesting.
curious things that's unfolded is kind of consciousness curves back on itself, and it creates this kind of subtle space. And then later on, when it's in a more manifest level, when you get a universe and stuff, it manifests as actual space. But that's happening layers. There's layers and layers and layers of that within itself. It like so space is nested. So we have the space of creation within which the space of our universe, within which the space of our galaxy, however you want to look at it going all the way down, and even this pen arises in a subtle space in consciousness that self interacts to create this form of a pen. So it's all nested within this room, within this building, within this community, blah blah blah. So there's all these nestings of space, and so one of the things that I find is, like, for example, I'm looking inside the body to clear out any unfinished business, and kind of going through cleaning everything out. Oh, everything's nice and clear, and it's good, and then something else comes up, and it's like, where did that come from? But it's like there's these nested spaces that we've kind of pushed stuff away into, and then something triggers them to come forward, and then we become aware of them, and like that. And and so there's this whole nested thing, and it has a reality on a number of levels. And so you can have, like what you were describing, where you can have a whole community within within another space that's we're oblivious to, and they're oblivious to us. And you get um, I'm trying to think of another example of that. Came
The
up.
bacteria in our stomach.
Oh yeah, I mean our life. I mean, or just look at our physiology,
We're
where every one of
yeah.
the cells in our body is a life form. It has its own consciousness and
It
sensing.
has some
And
consciousness.
they got light sensors on cells, and there's trillions of them. And then within that body are all these other, the gut biome and all this other stuff, that there's a large, an even larger number of life forms all within the body, and yet we experience ourselves as being a person.
It's amazing. I was
Yeah.
at a talk with Bruce Lipton last year, and he
Oh
spoke
yeah.
about hands-on healing, right? And he was saying what happens is the cells in the hands of like a healer, or like they're healthy, they're healed, and they can communicate with the cells in the other person. And when you put your hands over the affected area, the cells in your hands are actually sending messages into the cells you know, the disease or whatever, and it's creating a healing. So that's why he spoke about on it. Incredible.
And there's sense, you know, like deep inside your body, there are cells and they have light sensors and they respond to light and that kind of thing. There are, in the Vedic tradition, they have light therapies where they use different lights and stuff.
Yeah. So when I do my healing session and the transmission is coming in, or also energies with certain qualities, they always work on the cellular level. So of course people understand it intellectually, but the system needs to understand it. So this is, every cell has to get the information, and then you can live from there. You can actually live it. So it's embodied. That information is embodied because the cells, they know about it. Yeah. So this is how I describe it. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I have one last question. So it's something I do, and I haven't heard you talk about it, or haven't read it in the book. So I call it a spiritual being. So it's the divine part of our soul. Everybody has it, and it's basically very far back in our systems. So it's kind of hidden, and it can get activated. And that's what I do for people. So I activate it, and then they can experience like the divine part of themselves in their system, and can experience their own energy unfolding in their system. And what it basically does, so I call it spiritual being, and then I found out that Sri Aurobindo and the Divine Mother are talking about it as well, and they call it psychic being. That it basically helps the embodiment process or the enlightenment process from inside out. So the spiritual being starts working on blockages and stuff like that. And its goal is to come forward, because for most people it's in the background. So it wants to come forward and live life through this vessel. So that's the goal. And then you have the consciousness part. So it's both. And yeah, I just want to know what, if you ever talked about this, or
Okay, when you say being, do you mean like presence, or are you talking about an actual being, like
I
a
mean,
form?
it was shown to me first as being. That's why I just called it being. So I didn't know what it was. I was just doing it for people. But basically what it is, it's their, I mean, I talked to Dorothy Rowe about it. She said natural potential. And I think this describes it very well. So it's where there is no right or wrong. There is only wisdom. There is only divine knowledge. There is only pure love and all of that. So all these very pure qualities are in there. And yeah, they can be experienced. Like when you experience it, you feel like you're full of strength, you're full of wisdom, you're full of just you don't need anything else out of you. It's like everything you need is basically that. That's all you need.
There's a term from the Yoga Sutra that is called Ritam for short, or Ritam Bharapragyan. It's one of the verses that basically means that consciousness which knows only truth. And that's kind of refers back to what I was talking before about after awakening, when the intellect is associated with the self, with consciousness instead of with the mind. And then it gains a sort of stability and reliability. And so that's, you know, the soul kind of sits there in the heart. And,
yeah, but it's an experience in the body. So it's not,
right.
You can't experience it with the mind. It's basically, right. It's an energy with all these qualities, or it's like, that's what you are on the core. That's what you are in the core, and this can be expanded. So when I expand it for people, I expand it in the whole systems, and I bring it forward, and then they basically experience the life for a while. I mean, it always depends on how long they can hold it, because the nervous system kind of needs to be ready for it. So they can hold it for a while, and then they go through life, and basically everything is experienced through that. So the human stuff is in the background, and all these very pure potentials are in the forefront, and then life is experienced as a flow. Everything is simple. There are no problems, and all of that. So it's just unfolding. Beautiful. Everything is just unfolding. Yeah. Okay, so
yeah, the reason I asked about whether it was a form or not was because there's also this thing that I experienced at once. They call it the being the size of the thumb that resides in the heart.
That's what Sri Aurobindo calls it. It's the size of a thumb. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, it's of course it's very small. So it's not really a being. It's like a.
That's the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
David,
So
it's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was just very, again, that's different ways of experiencing it, because you can experience it as a, personalized as a form, or as just a principle or law of nature or whatever. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of, in my experience, there's kind of key places that have, the heart's really special in a number of ways. Um, like people often talk about a thread that kind of, well, there's the Kundalini line that kind of comes up through the chakras and out the top of the head, and that kind of goes up through all the layers up to the top of creation, kind of all branching up, connecting and that. But there's also a thread that comes perpendicular straight into the heart, which is a much more direct connection to the divine. It yeah,
What's that connected to, David?
to the divine, goes straight up. It doesn't
Oh,
go through all the layers of creation.
Yeah, I
okay.
mean, it makes
And
sense. It makes sense, yeah. Because you
the
can
soul
have
sits
that
there.
experience directly. You can have the experience of God basically directly just by activating this area, or this, I call it just a
Yeah,
being, because at first people don't understand that it's themselves, so it's better to say it's a being, or a divine part of them, until they can, because they
yeah.
can communicate it with it as well and then bring it forward. Yeah.
So David, I felt a bit guilty last week after you asked me, did I meditate anymore? And I said no. So I felt a bit guilty. I think it was Friday night or Saturday night, and I sat on the sofa here and I said, okay, let me try and meditate for a while. And I started meditating, and I experienced a little blue ball. All of a sudden, I saw this blue ball falling down, and it wasn't in me; it was in somebody else, and it dropped down into the heart, and it told me to reach in and pull the blue ball forward. And I kind of got the sense it was what Eva was talking about, that the being, the psychic being, or the
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's it happened. Yeah.
No. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, it's just interesting what comes up for us to do, right? It's just
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, it's wild. Yeah, I'll be kind of going along, and just someone will send me an email, and it's like, oh yeah, I got a naughty leaf reading done with Vasishta, and it's like, oh, I need to do that, and it's so,
Yeah.
or whatever, there's just kind of like this little things that come up, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
it's
you
funny.
just go with it. You just it's
Yeah,
almost like a flow state, right? It's just like, oh
yeah,
yeah, why not? Let's do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to spend
Yeah.
a little time getting to know, to trust the flow, and that
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
going to grad school was like that too. I had no plan to go to grad school, and but I was writing and couldn't figure out how to support myself. The old work I used to do, it was really clear I wasn't supposed to be doing it. I kept on trying to, because that's what I knew, how to make money and stuff. But um, but the support got lower and lower and lower, and just crazy problems coming up, and this kind of stuff. So it was really clear that I wasn't the right direction. And so what am I supposed to be doing? And so I ended up going on this retreat program where I got a grant for basically meditating in a group, and got a grant, and that could support me for 6 months while I was writing. And
Sounds good.
but as soon as I arrived there was some kind of a presentation or event or whatever, and this woman sits down beside me in the thing, and says, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but she starts telling me about this compressed master's program, and that can be done in a year. It's classes 6 days a week and all this kind of stuff. But she's like, I'm not interested in it. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but she tells me about it. And I was aware of the program, but not that they had a compressed version of it. The usual is 3 years. And so anyways, I look into it, and they tell me it's, all my paperwork was supposed to be in several months before as an international student and all this. And so I was way late, and it said it would take a miracle to come together in time. But it all did. And so I ended up, a month later, I was in grad school. It's just like, no plan or no intention. It just
Mhm.
presents itself, and it's like,
Yeah.
I should do this, I should look at this, I should do this, and I should do this. And it all just kind of comes in, and I had the exact amount of money I needed, and just it's funny how those,
Beautiful.
yeah,
This
Mm.
this is what I really like about the whole spiritual path, that things are unfolding. Um, yeah, it's just right. So we're at the right place, the right time, and then things are happening. And yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah, I was joking with a friend yesterday that there was a certain point in there when I was making that transition from, working in a normal way to not. And this isn't true of everybody. Some people, that they become more involved in their work. But the way it happened here, the Dharma was to be writing, and so that's like going through this process, and the old ways are falling away. And so there was kind of a group of people who knew me who kind of thought my life was a bit of a disaster. And then there are people who kind of thought that my life was this kind of exemplary example of miracles, because this stuff kept happening, where just money would show up out of nowhere unexpectedly, and that would kind of support me for a couple of months, and then something else would happen, and that kind of thing. Happily, it got a lot more consistent later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay. I think we've probably come to the we've been talking for a long time.
Very long time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really nice. I loved it.
I love all the podcasts, but I especially love this one, and I really love the format we did. So
yeah,
I really, really enjoyed today.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for coming on again.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Conversation.
That was
And
really
it's fun to
wonderful.
compare notes.
Compare notes, yeah, exactly.
Oh,
That's
it was
nice.
incredible. So great. It really is. I mean, it really helps the unfoldment, right? When you talk to somebody else who's gone through it, like,
yeah, and every
that
so often
information
somebody say something, and it's like, oh, I hadn't noticed that before, and it kind of like your attention goes there, and the whole thing unfolds or whatever. Yeah, it's
But I
really
also noticed when we talked about certain things that, there was like light coming in and doing something in my system, when we talked about certain things, so it's happening as well in the background. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah. The energy was really beautiful. So
yeah.
David,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you. That was amazing. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank
That
you.
was awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for listening.